It was Tyler's first semester at Halloway University, an old, ivy-covered campus tucked into the quiet outskirts of Maine. The school had a long-standing reputation for academic excellence and a quieter, whispered history of strange occurrences, as locals would vaguely put it. Tyler wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. He cared more about scholarships than superstitions. He'd arrived a week early for orientation and had been told there'd been a mix-up with housing assignments. The main dorm he was supposed to stay in, Crenshaw Hall, had overbooked. With rooms full, housing placed him temporarily in an overflow suite at the end of North Wing in the oldest dorm on campus, Greystone Hall. He got the key from a disinterested housing assistant who looked briefly at the room number, paused, and said, "Oh, weird. No one's been in that one for a while. You're in 6C. She didn't elaborate, and Tyler, too exhausted from travel, just nodded and made his way across campus. Greystone Hall stood like a crumbling relic of another era. Stone architecture, foggy windows, and creaky steps. Inside, the hallways were oddly silent. No chatter, no music, no other students. It felt less like a dorm and more like a sealed-off wing of a hospital. Room 6C was at the farthest end of the third floor, just past a rusting fire door that didn't quite close. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and when he entered, it felt like the air inside hadn't been disturbed in years. The room was clean, but cold. Dust clung to the window ledges, and the furniture, though intact, felt like it had been untouched for decades. The most unsettling thing was the mirror. A large, ornate one bolted to the closet door, stretching nearly floor to ceiling. Its edges were clouded, and no matter how much Tyler wiped it, there was always a faint film like breath across the glass. That first night, he chalked up the oddities to the age of the building. The temperature, the creaking pipes, even the quiet. But then the scratching began. It started just past 3 a.m. A slow, rhythmic sound, like nails dragging across wood. Tyler sat up in bed, his eyes adjusting to the faint light spilling in from the street lamp outside. He froze. The sound was coming from inside the closet. He stared at it for a long time. The door didn't move. The mirror, though, seemed to breathe. He could swear he saw the edges pulse softly, as if the glass itself were flexing. He didn't open it. He waited until the noise stopped. The next morning, he told himself he must have dreamt it. Sleep paralysis, maybe. But that day, he noticed something odd when he returned from orientation. His backpack had moved. He always dropped it beside the bed, but now it sat propped neatly on the desk chair. The chair had been slightly turned to face the closet. Still, Tyler didn't panic. He just figured maybe the cleaning staff had come through, even though he locked the door when he left, even though nothing else in the room had been touched. That night, the scratching came again, louder, sharper, as if whatever was behind the closet door had grown impatient. This time, Tyler approached the door, gripping a flashlight. He counted to 3 and flung it open. Nothing. Just his jackets, his extra bedding, and a strange draft of icy air. He exhaled, scolded himself for feeding into the paranoia, and went back to bed. But the next morning, he found something new. Carved into the underside of his desk, barely visible unless you bent down and looked closely, were the words, "It's not your room." His stomach sank. He called housing, told them the room felt wrong, and asked if he could be moved early. The voice on the other end paused, then said, "You're in 6C? Hold on." After a long silence, she returned. "There's no one assigned to 6C this year. That room's been closed for maintenance. Are you sure that's your room?" "I've been living in it for 2 nights," he said. "Someone gave me the key. We don't have records of that. No one should be in there." Tyler didn't sleep that night. He packed his things and stayed in the campus library until dawn. When he returned, his bed had been made. Not just made, but tucked perfectly like hospital corners. A small note lay on his pillow, written in neat, block letters. "You're not welcome." He didn't wait. He grabbed his things and went straight to the housing office in person. This time, the assistant he spoke with looked genuinely disturbed. She explained that room 6C had been sealed off 3 years ago after a student, Evan Mallory, was found dead inside. Officially, it was labeled as undetermined causes, but students whispered about mirror rot, an urban legend on campus. According to rumor, Evan had become obsessed with the mirror in the closet, claiming he saw someone inside watching him. Not a reflection, another person, someone who mimicked him, until it didn't. They found scratches on the inside of the closet door and claw marks on the mirror itself. Since then, no student had been placed there. The room had been sealed. The key should have been locked in a vault. Tyler showed them his key. The housing director paled. "That's not one of ours." That same day, Tyler was reassigned to Crenshaw Hall. The new room was warm, brightly lit, and alive with student chatter. He tried to forget 6C, but some nights, as he drifted off, he'd see a flicker of movement in the corner of his mirror. Just a flash, a breath, a suggestion of something behind. The following semester, the university announced plans to demolish the north wing of Greystone Hall. Structural reasons, they said, but students swore they saw figures moving behind the top floor windows long after the building had been vacated. And sometimes when they walked past that crumbling building, they'd swear they heard scratching. Slow, rhythmic, waiting. They noticed her around the third week of the semester. She sat in the back row of room 306, quiet, barely noticeable. Always in the same spot, always staring straight ahead, never raising her hand, never speaking, just present, observing. At first, no one thought much of it. Big lecture halls are like that. Dozens of students come and go. Some faces blur together. You miss one class, someone new is suddenly there. But as the weeks passed, strange details began to surface. It was Caleb, a sophomore majoring in psychology, who first noticed something off. He always sat 2 rows in front of her and swore he never saw her take notes. Not once. No laptop, no pen, no paper. She just sat with her hands on the desk, perfectly still, her eyes fixated on the professor. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. One afternoon, during a group discussion, the professor asked the class a general question, one that wasn't even directed at anyone. There was an awkward silence until the girl in the back softly spoke. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but what she said was chilling. There is no truth in the lecture, only the illusion of repetition. Everyone turned around. The professor tried to play it off with a chuckle. He must have assumed she was being philosophical or sarcastic. But the class went quiet after that. It wasn't just the odd remark. It was her face. Nobody could describe it properly. Every time someone tried, they struggled. She's pale, but not in a sick way. Her eyes look like they're reflecting something that's not there. Her clothes, they look outdated. Eventually, Caleb decided to ask around. He spoke with the TA, the department admin, even checked the course roster. There was no student by that name in the class. But here's the part that made his blood run cold. He hadn't even said her name yet. When he asked the TA, "Is Lena Wills registered for this course?" the TA blinked, confused. "How do you know that name?" she asked. Caleb froze. "She's been sitting in class all month." "No, that's not possible. Lena Wills was a student here, but that was years ago. She died in 2016. There was an accident. The campus doesn't really talk about it anymore." According to what little Caleb could dig up, Lena Wills had been a freshman enrolled in that very class. Foundations of Cognitive Theory. One afternoon in early October, she had stayed behind to ask the professor a question. No one saw her leave the building. The next morning, her body was found in the stairwell leading to the lower boiler rooms, places no student had any business going. Security footage was mysteriously corrupted. Her cause of death was ruled as accidental trauma due to a fall, but campus rumor insisted something stranger had happened. Some said she was obsessed with the theory of recursive consciousness, the idea that the mind can observe itself endlessly in a feedback loop until it fractures. Others said she had begun talking about the class as if it were a dream she couldn't wake up from. She wrote essays that didn't make sense, referenced lectures that had never happened. The last sentence in her journal, which was never released to the public, allegedly read, "I'm still in room 306. They just can't see me." After that, Caleb didn't return to class for a week. When he did, she was still there. Same seat, same posture, as if nothing had changed. He tried ignoring her, but it got worse. Every time he turned around, she was watching him. Not the professor, not the screen. Him, like she knew he knew. The tension became unbearable. He avoided eye contact, changed seats, sat on the opposite side of the room. Still, he could feel it, her eyes boring into the back of his neck. Cold, heavy, expectant. Then one morning, the TA pulled him aside before class. She looked pale. "You asked about Lena," she whispered. "I looked through the attendance sheets from 2016. The last person she ever spoke to was a student named Caleb, too. Different last name, maybe. But she wrote about him, said he reminded her of something, like a memory repeating itself." That night, Caleb dreamed of room 306. Except it wasn't the same. The desks were all empty. The projector flickered. And there, in the back row, she sat. Except this time, she wasn't staring blankly. She was smiling. He tried to run, but found himself stuck in the chair. He tried to scream, but his voice came out in reverse, like a tape rewinding. She stood up, walked slowly toward him. As she reached him, she whispered something so softly he couldn't understand. But when he woke, the words were still echoing in his head. "It's your turn to stay behind." He never returned to class after that. Campus security was called when the professor noticed a strange smell in room 306 a week later. In the back row, wedged between two dusty desks, they found a pile of clothing. Caleb's jacket, his backpack, his phone, all neatly folded. No sign of him, just a notebook left on the desk. The last page read, "She's not watching a lecture. She's watching the ones who notice." That class was discontinued the following semester. Room 306 was locked, then eventually converted into a storage unit. But students still whisper about it. Every so often, a custodian will report hearing quiet breathing from behind the stacked chairs, or catching a glimpse of a pale girl sitting perfectly still among the shadows. She's not taking notes. She's not listening to the lecture. She's waiting for someone to notice her. And once they do, they don't come back. It started with a challenge. A group of students from a university's paranormal club dared each other to spend the night in Bradwick Hall, one of the oldest buildings on campus. It was built in the late 1800s, with creaking iron staircases, stained glass windows covered in dust, and walls so thick that cell signals vanished the moment you walked in. The building had been closed for years due to renovations that never actually began. Everyone knew Bradwick was more of a relic than a resource. Still, on some nights, you'd see a light on in Lecture Hall C. Marcus was the one who decided to investigate. He wasn't exactly a believer, but he had heard the stories, how students claimed to hear murmured voices echoing from the third floor. Not yelling, not screaming, just discussion. Calm, measured conversation, as if a class were still going on long after the building had emptied. He told his roommate Kieran about it. Kieran rolled his eyes. "It's probably just old pipes, or a busted PA system glitching out. You think ghosts stick to office hours." But that night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of lectures still being held in a hall where time had stopped. He didn't know what compelled him, but sometime after midnight, he grabbed his flashlight and left the dorm. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The lock on the side entrance was broken, just like someone in the club said. Bradwick Hall greeted him with that smell, dry wood, wet stone, and old books. His footsteps echoed, every sound swallowed by the thick walls. Up the staircase, 3rd floor. Lecture Hall C. The double doors groaned as he pushed them open. Rows of wooden desks sat in silence, all facing a dusty chalkboard. The moonlight barely cut through the stained glass panels, painting red and violet shadows across the seats. Marcus took a few tentative steps in and waited. At first, nothing. And then, just faintly, he heard it. A voice. Male. Calm. Authoritative. It came from the direction of the chalkboard, but no one was there. The voice was speaking in an even, measured tone, as if lecturing. But Marcus couldn't make out the words. It was too quiet, and yet somehow too close. Then came another voice. Female. Younger. Asking a question. He whipped around, but the room remained still. Empty desks. No movement. He stood there, frozen, listening. The voices continued, a back and forth. A teacher answering, a student responding. But the content of the conversation remained muffled, distorted. It wasn't the building's acoustics. It was like the words themselves were edited, held just out of reach from comprehension. As he strained to listen, the voices grew louder. Not in volume, in number. A 3rd voice joined in, then a 4th. Within minutes, it sounded like a full classroom engaged in discussion, rising and falling, overlapping a chorus of unseen speakers. And yet Marcus remained alone. He turned to leave, but something strange happened. The door wouldn't open. He hadn't locked it. There was no lock on the inside. And yet when he pulled, the handle felt fused, like the wood around it had softened and closed in. He backed away, his flashlight flickering. As the beam swept across the room, he noticed something even stranger. The desks were not quite empty anymore. The air above them shimmered, faintly, like heat rising from pavement. For a split second, Marcus thought he could see silhouettes, slumped figures like students mid-lecture. But every time he blinked, they vanished. And then he heard his name. Soft, direct, clear. Marcus. He turned to the board. A line of chalk had been drawn while he wasn't looking. A new sentence forming, scrawled by an unseen hand. One word at a time. You're late. The flashlight slipped from his hand. In the moment of darkness, the murmuring exploded into a full-blown conversation. The voices were speaking directly to him now, but not with questions, with accusations. Why did you stop coming to class? Were we not interesting enough? Do you even remember us? He dropped to the floor, scrambling for his flashlight. When he turned it back on, the figures were gone, but the desks were no longer empty. In each chair sat a student. Their clothes looked dated, corduroy jackets, wool skirts, thick-rimmed glasses. Some were dressed in garments so old they looked almost theatrical. But it wasn't the clothing that disturbed him. It was their faces, expressionless, paler than bone, and their eyes. Each student stared directly at him, unblinking. Marcus backed toward the door again. He tried not to blink, not to breathe too loudly. One of the figures, a girl in the second row, slowly raised her arm. Not in warning, in participation, like she was waiting for him to call on her. The air in the room thickened. The voices had stopped again. The silence was worse. It was pregnant with anticipation. He pounded on the door. Nothing. He turned around, only to find the professor, at the chalkboard, standing, writing. He hadn't been there before. The man was tall, thin, in a dark brown suit that looked 2 centuries too old. He didn't turn around, but his voice rang out in that same calm tone Marcus had heard before. You're not enrolled in this course. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. You weren't invited. The professor slowly turned. His face wasn't human. It was close. Close enough that you might not notice at first glance. But the details were off. Skin stretched too tightly across the skull, lips too thin, and eyes like deep, still wells. Liquid black, reflecting nothing. And yet they burned with familiarity. You've forgotten your classmates. Marcus, the professor said. But we remember you. With a jolt, the flashlight died. Darkness swallowed everything. He doesn't remember how he got out. Not exactly. Just that the door was open when the light came back. Just that the hallway outside felt colder. That the building rejected him. Marcus left Bradwick Hall and never returned. But the next morning, he found something under his dorm door. A piece of lined notebook paper, yellowed and torn. One line was written on it, in faded ink. Final class meets tonight. Attendance mandatory. And under it, 12 names. All real. All students who had disappeared from campus records over the last 60 years. At the very bottom, his name and the number 13. It started with a syllabus, a harmless, unremarkable piece of paper, white typed stapled neatly in the upper left corner. It outlined everything the students of Dr. Thorne's modern cognitive science class would need to know: grading policies, weekly topics, reading lists, exam dates. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one line. Final exam, Room B, 03, May 17th, 11:30 p.m. Most students assumed it was a typo. Midnight finals weren't just rare, they were unheard of. Room B, 03 didn't even appear on the campus map. Still, no one bothered to question it. Dr. Thorne was known for being eccentric. His lectures walked a fine line between brilliance and madness. He'd pace in front of the board, mumbling phrases in dead languages, referencing neurological studies that hadn't been published, or in some cases, didn't exist. But his class was an easy A, and in college that was enough. As the semester dragged on, something subtle began to shift. Students started forgetting things, not just small things like names or dates, but full lectures. One girl swore she took a quiz the previous Friday, only for the professor to deny it ever happened. Another student showed up to class one morning in pajamas and flip-flops, claiming she thought it was 2 a.m. No one connected it to the syllabus. By early May, attendance had dropped by half. Those who remained looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes, jittery, twitchy. Some reported sleep paralysis. Others described dreams of long corridors, windowless classrooms, and a tall figure in a coat standing motionless at the front of the room. Then came the night of the final, May 17th. A strange fog had blanketed the campus that evening, thick and unmoving. Streetlights flickered. Cell reception failed. But still, 23 students showed up outside the science building just before 11:30 p.m., clutching their pens and scantrons. Room B03 didn't appear on any floor plan, but the heavy metal door was unlocked, waiting in the sub-basement, 3 levels down where the air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. Inside, the room was uncomfortably cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The desks were arranged in a perfect grid, each with a test packet already placed on top. There were no clocks, no windows, no emergency exits, and no sign of Dr. Thorne. The students took their seats. No one remembers what happened next. Not clearly. Some claimed they blacked out. Others reported that the test questions weren't in English or even words. One girl said her packet was completely blank, but when she closed her eyes, the questions appeared in her mind, burned there in sharp, sterile clarity. When they awoke, it was morning. The room was empty. No desks, no test papers, just concrete and dust. They emerged from the basement disoriented, eyes bloodshot, with no memory of leaving the room. Their phones were dead. Some reported nosebleeds. One student, Jacob Lynn, began speaking in strange, looping phrases, strings of words that seemed profound until you realized they had no meaning. The university responded swiftly. Campus security sealed off the basement. Officials stated that room B03 had never existed, that it must have been an old janitorial closet misused by students playing a prank. But all 23 students had the same story. When the grades came out, something even stranger happened. Everyone in the class, those who had taken the test and those who hadn't, received the exact same final score, 73.4%. Not an A, not AB, an eerily specific number. Several students dropped out after that. Others transferred, citing mental health reasons. Dr. Thorne was never seen again. According to faculty records, he had taken a sudden leave of absence due to personal matters. But there's something no one can explain. Months later, one student, a sophomore named Melissa Kerr, was browsing her photo gallery from earlier that year. In a random selfie taken in her dorm room, a sheet of paper was pinned on her wall behind her. It was the test. Every page, every symbol, every question, perfectly preserved, though she swore she'd never brought anything out of room B03. Forensic analysis of the image revealed something disturbing. The paper had no ink. It was blank. The markings appeared only in the photo and only under infrared light. Melissa deleted the image. The next morning, her roommate found her on the bathroom floor, curled into a fetal position, whispering the number 73.4 over and over again. The administration denied any connection to the final. But even now, on May 17th each year, students report flickering lights in the science building basement. Some swear they hear scratching behind the old door where room B03 used to be. And occasionally, a test packet is found lying on the floor, marked in red ink with a score circled at the top. 73.4%. No one knows what happens if you open one, and no one really wants to find out. Midterm season at university is always stressful. The late-night study sessions, the nervous pacing across campus, the endless coffee cups piling up on desks. But for one student, the pressure wasn't the worst part. It was the silence that came after his roommate vanished. It started like any other semester. Jack and his roommate, Mark, were assigned to a small dorm room on the third floor of an aging campus building. Mark was quiet, almost painfully so. He never talked about his family, and when asked about his hobbies, he'd just shrug and say, "I'm here to study." That was it. Jack didn't think much of it until the week before midterms. That week, Mark's behavior began to shift. He stopped coming out of his room entirely. At first, Jack thought Mark was just buried in books. But soon, the light under Mark's door went out completely. No sounds, no movement, nothing. Jack tried knocking, calling out, but there was no response. The other residents in the dorm said they hadn't seen Mark around either. The university's health center had no record of any appointments or absences for him. It was as if Mark had completely evaporated. Worried, Jack reported it to campus security. They checked the room, but found it empty. No clothes, no books, no personal items. Only Mark's laptop left on the desk, screen cracked and frozen on a single image. It was a photo of the dorm hallway outside their door, taken at midnight. Jack's unease deepened when he examined the photo. There was a shadowy figure standing in the hallway, just a dark blur. Something was off. The timestamp was exactly midnight, but Jack had no memory of Mark ever leaving the room that late. The police were called. They treated the disappearance like a missing person case, but with no leads, they hit a dead end. No cameras caught Mark leaving the building. No witnesses remembered him. Jack began to feel the dorm was different after Mark disappeared. At night, he'd hear faint tapping on the walls, the kind that didn't seem to come from any neighbors. Sometimes, when he woke up, he'd see the silhouette of a figure standing silently in the corner of his room, gone when he blinked. His friends joked that Jack was imagining things, stressed out from exams. But Jack knew what he saw. One night, driven by restless anxiety, Jack decided to search Mark's room more thoroughly. He returned with permission from the door manager. The room was as empty as before, except the cracked laptop remained on the desk. Jack powered it on. The laptop was password protected, but after a few tries, he guessed the password, Mark's birth date. Inside, there was a single folder named Midterms. It contained a series of audio files. Hesitant, Jack pressed play on the first file. The audio was faint at first, a barely audible whisper. "Can you hear me? I think someone's here." The next clip was louder. "I'm locked in the room. Something's wrong. The walls, they're closing in." Jack's heart pounded. Each audio file was a recording of Mark's increasingly frantic messages. The last one ended abruptly with a panicked breath and the sound of scratching at the door. Jack played the next file. It wasn't audio, but a video, a shaky, grainy recording taken from Mark's phone. In the video, the room seemed normal at first. Then, the walls began to warp, stretching and twisting unnaturally, like a scene from a nightmare. The ceiling flickered, and shadows danced in impossible shapes. Mark's voice trembled as he whispered, "It's not real. It's not real." The video ended suddenly. The screen went black. Jack sat back, chilled. What kind of nightmare had Mark been trapped in? The university counselors dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations, but Jack wasn't convinced. Something was deeply wrong with that dorm room. Determined to understand, Jack spoke with a retired professor who specialized in campus history. The professor told Jack a story that sent a cold shiver down his spine. Decades ago, the dorm building had been a psychiatric hospital. Patients were confined in rooms not much different from Jack and Mark's. Rumors said some patients disappeared mysteriously during times of stress or trauma. The hospital was shut down abruptly after an unexplained fire. The professor said, "Some believe the building still traps the restless souls of those patients, especially during moments of high anxiety or fear." Jack realized Mark might never have left that room, not physically and not mentally. Was Mark lost in some twisted dimension tied to the building's dark past? Or was it something even more sinister? Psychological breakdown so severe that reality itself fractured? One night, Jack decided to spend the night in the room next to where Mark disappeared. He set up cameras, hoping to catch something. Around midnight, the air grew cold. The walls seemed to hum with a low, vibrating sound. On the footage, faint outlines appeared, shadows slipping along the edges of the frame. Jack heard a whisper, soft, desperate, "Help me." He never heard Mark's voice in person again, but the recordings, the photo, and the chilling presence lingered in his mind, a puzzle with no solution. Mark's disappearance during midterms was never solved. But Jack learned one terrifying truth. Sometimes the stress and fear we carry can open doors to places we're not meant to enter, trapping us in a silence that no one else can break. At the heart of a sprawling university campus, there was a library unlike any other. It stood tall, ancient, and silent, its stone walls weathered by decades of rain and whispers. Most students saw it simply as a place to cram before exams or escape the chaos of campus life. But a few knew it held secrets beneath its polished floors, secrets no one spoke about aloud. The basement of the library was strictly off-limits. Officially, it was sealed due to safety concerns. Unofficially, rumors swirled about why the doors were chained shut. Rumors passed in hushed tones among late-night study groups. Some said the basement was home to rare manuscripts that were too dangerous to read. Others whispered about strange disappearances, students who ventured too far into the stacks and never came back. Among those students was a quiet, curious sophomore named Ethan. He wasn't like most of his peers. While others juggled parties and deadlines, Ethan was drawn to forgotten history, the stories buried beneath layers of dust and time. And the basement? It was a puzzle he was determined to solve. It started with a forgotten library map Ethan stumbled upon while researching for a history paper. The map, yellowed and brittle, hinted at a maze-like lower level, marked only as restricted area. It showed winding corridors lined with shelves packed with books and strange symbols scrawled along the edges. Symbols that made no sense to Ethan, but sent a chill down his spine. One rainy evening, with the campus nearly empty and the clock striking midnight, Ethan found himself standing before the heavy metal door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The rusted chains had been loosened, a small gap revealing a flicker of darkness beyond. He had no idea who had tampered with the lock, but the opportunity was irresistible. With a deep breath, Ethan slipped inside. The air in the basement was cold and stale, a sharp contrast to the quiet hum of the library above. The faint glow of his phone illuminated the narrow stone corridor. As he walked deeper, the walls seemed to close in, the ceiling low and oppressive. Rows of ancient shelves loomed on either side, packed tight with leather-bound tomes and manuscripts with titles in languages Ethan couldn't read. The silence was complete, save for the soft echo of his footsteps and the distant drip of water somewhere far ahead. But then something changed. The temperature dropped sharply. Ethan's breath became visible, mist curling in the dim light. The shadows seemed to shift as if watching him. He turned a corner and saw a small wooden desk covered in dust, with a single book lying open. The pages were filled with strange drawings, twisting shapes that looked like labyrinths, eyes, and keys. A note scrawled in faded ink read, "Beware the keeper of stories untold." A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. What did that mean? He picked up the book, feeling the weight of history in his hands. Suddenly, the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the basement. But the library had been empty for hours. Ethan froze. The footsteps grew louder, closer. His heart hammered in his chest. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in a dark robe, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Ethan's mind screamed to run, but his feet stayed rooted. The figure spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from another world. "You should not be here, seeker of forbidden knowledge." Ethan stammered, trying to explain his curiosity, but the figure raised a hand. "This basement is not a place for the living. The stories kept here are alive and hungry." As if on cue, the shelves around Ethan seemed to creak and groan. Books fluttered open on their own, pages turning wildly. Whispered voices rose, unintelligible but filled with urgency and menace. Ethan realized then, these were not ordinary books. They were vessels, prisons for spirits trapped within their pages, cursed to haunt the library's depths. "You must leave," the figure warned, "before the stories consume you too." But the basement shadows had other plans. The lights flickered and died. The darkness pressed closer, thick and suffocating. Ethan fumbled for his phone. It screened the only light in the engulfing black. He sprinted through the twisting corridors, the voices rising into frantic screams. Doors slammed shut before him. Invisible hands seemed to brush against the skin. And then, just as suddenly as it began, he burst through a heavy door and into the library's main hall. The noise stopped. The figure was gone. But the book, the one he still held in his trembling hands, it was empty. No drawings, no words, just blank pages. Ethan never returned to the basement. He told no one what he saw, afraid of being labeled crazy or worse, cursed. But sometimes, late at night, when the library is silent and the wind howls through the empty halls, some students swear they see a faint glow beneath the basement door. And if you listen closely, you can hear the faintest whisper carried on the cold air. The stories are waiting. It was the kind of cold autumn night that seemed to press in on you from every direction. The kind of night where even the air felt heavy, as if time itself was slowing down. I was a junior at a small university in New England, and our campus was famous for its ancient clock tower, an old brick relic that had stood for over a century, its great clock face visible from almost anywhere on campus. Everyone said it was one of the most reliable clocks around, always perfectly in sync with the official time. But that night, everything changed. It was just past midnight when I left the library, the final exam papers stacked in my bag. The campus was nearly deserted, save for the occasional security patrol or the faint glow of street lamps casting long shadows along the paths. As I walked toward my dorm, I looked up at the clock tower out of habit, and that's when I noticed it. The clock's hands had stopped moving. They were frozen at exactly 12:07. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light. But no, there was perfectly still. The second hand wasn't ticking. The minute hand wasn't shifting. The clock had simply stopped. Curious, I checked my phone. It was indeed 12:07. I looked back up at the tower, expecting the clock to resume any second. But it didn't. The next morning, rumors were already swirling. Some said the clock had stopped due to mechanical failure. Others whispered of a strange power outage on campus the night before. But the strange part? No one seemed to remember anything unusual happening exactly at 12:07. That afternoon, I met up with my friend Sarah, a history major fascinated by campus lore. She told me about an old legend connected to the clock tower, something she'd heard from a professor decades ago. Apparently, long ago, there was a student named Thomas who had died under mysterious circumstances near the tower. He was a brilliant but troubled soul, obsessed with time and the nature of reality itself. Some said he tried to stop time permanently to escape something he feared. On the night he died, it was said the clock stopped briefly at 12:07, the very time of his death. Sarah's voice dropped lower as she explained that since then, the clock was rumored to freeze whenever something unnatural was about to happen on campus, a warning or maybe a sign. I laughed it off at the time, but deep down, something about the story unsettled me. That night, as I studied in my dorm, I kept glancing toward the window. The clock tower was just visible in the distance, its frozen hands mocking me. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic ticking, like a heartbeat coming from somewhere outside. It was slow, deliberate, almost like a countdown. Curious and unable to sleep, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The campus was bathed in pale moonlight, eerily silent except for that ticking sound. I followed it toward the clock tower, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As I neared the base of the tower, the ticking grew louder, echoing against the stone walls. I glanced up again, the clock hand still frozen at 12:07. Then, without warning, a chilling wind whipped through the courtyard, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, flickering and twisting, appeared near the tower's entrance, like a figure caught between moments, slipping in and out of sight. I could just make out the outline of a young man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, staring at me with eyes that seemed empty, yet full of sorrow. I froze, heart pounding. The shadow whispered a single word, barely audible over the wind. Remember. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. I ran back to my dorm, the ticking now replaced by an eerie silence. The next morning, the clock was working again, its hands moving normally, ticking in time with the rest of the world. But something had changed. Students whispered of strange dreams that night, visions of lost time, of being trapped in moments that never passed. Some said their watches stopped working at exactly 12:07. And me? I couldn't shake the feeling that the clock's freeze was a message, a warning from the past, urging us to remember what time really means. Because sometimes when the clock stops, time doesn't just freeze. It listens, and it waits. It was the beginning of the fall semester at a small, quiet university tucked away in a rural town. The kind of campus where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. The kind of place where rumors spread quickly, but mostly stayed harmless. Until that year. The story begins with a student named Claire. She was a third-year English major, known for her curiosity and quiet determination. Claire always chose her classes early, careful to avoid the usual crowded lecture halls. This semester, she registered for a literature seminar that promised an intimate setting with no more than 15 students. On the first day of class, Claire arrived early. The classroom was an old brick-walled room on the third floor of the humanities building, dusty but charming, with high windows that let in slivers of autumn light. But there was something odd about this room. No plaques, no nameplates, no signs of recent activity. The door was unlocked, though, and inside, the students were already settling in. A man entered the room just before the hour began. Tall, with a sharp suit that seemed out of place in the casual campus setting. He introduced himself simply as Professor Alden. His voice was calm, almost too measured, with a slight accent Claire couldn't place. He had a presence that filled the room, not in a friendly way, but in a way that demanded attention without asking for it. What unsettled Claire first wasn't his demeanor, but the complete absence of any record of Professor Alden. She checked the university's online directory later that day and found no mention of him. No bio, no contact info, not even a mention in the course listings. When she asked around, no other students seemed to have heard of him, and the registrar's office insisted no such professor was employed there. Despite the strange facts, Claire kept attending the class. The seminar discussions were intense, with Professor Alden guiding the students through obscure literary themes and dark symbolism. He had an uncanny ability to know exactly what each student struggled with, often offering insights that felt deeply personal, like he could see into their minds. As the weeks passed, things grew stranger. The classroom door sometimes appeared locked when students tried to enter, only to be unlocked moments later. The hallway outside seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and on several occasions, Claire caught glimpses of flickering shadows moving just beyond her line of sight. One afternoon, Claire stayed late after class to ask Professor Alden a question about a poem. When she reached the empty classroom, it was dark except for the faint glow of a single lamp on the professor's desk. She called his name softly, but no response came. The air grew cold, and her breath misted in front of her face. Then, from the shadows behind the desk, came a voice, soft, yet chilling. "You shouldn't be here this late." Claire spun around, but no one was there. The lamp flickered and went out. Her heart pounded as she stumbled out of the room and down the hallway. The next day, she told a friend about what happened. They laughed nervously, suggesting maybe she was imagining things. But that night, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're closer than you think." Panic set in, but Claire was determined to find out the truth. She started digging deeper, accessing old university archives and speaking to retired faculty. One professor remembered a man named Alden who had been dismissed decades ago under mysterious circumstances, a scholar obsessed with forbidden knowledge who vanished without explanation. Claire's investigation uncovered even more unsettling details. Students who had previously enrolled in Alden's classes had disappeared without a trace. Records of their enrollment and grades were erased, as if they never existed. Some rumors hinted that Alden's obsession with the dark arts had led him to open a door that should have remained closed. One night, Claire received another message. "Meet me where the knowledge sleeps." She understood immediately. It was the library basement, a place few dared to go after hours. Against her better judgment, she went. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, its shelves lined with dusty, forgotten tomes. At the far end, a faint glow pulsed behind a heavy iron door. Claire approached and pushed it open, revealing a small chamber filled with ancient books and strange symbols etched into the walls. There, seated in a high-backed chair, was Professor Alden, or someone who looked exactly like him. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, voice echoing unnaturally. "Some knowledge demands a price." Claire tried to back away, but the door slammed shut. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with light, and the air thickened, making it hard to breathe. A cold hand grasped her wrist, and the last thing she saw was Alden's face, smiling with a terrible, knowing smile. The next morning, Claire was gone. No one found her, and like the others before her, her presence was wiped clean from the university's records. The classroom remained empty, but students reported hearing lectures echoing through the hallways late at night. Some say that if you stand outside the humanities building after midnight, you can hear Alden's voice calling out, inviting those who dare to enter a class that never officially existed. There's something about old university traditions that can feel timeless, like echoes from the past, lingering in empty corridors and dust-covered lecture halls. But sometimes those echoes carry more than nostalgia. Sometimes they carry secrets, dark, forgotten, and waiting. At a mid-sized college in the Midwest, students have passed down stories for decades about a mysterious orientation video. Supposedly recorded back in the late 1970s, it was shown to every freshman class. Until one year, it vanished without explanation. The freshman orientation tape, as it came to be known, was said to contain more than just welcome speeches and campus tours. It held warnings, cryptic messages, and footage that no one quite understood. One day, about a decade ago, the video simply disappeared from the university's archives. Staff insisted it had never existed. The orientation team said it was lost in a move. But old professors, custodians, and some of the oldest alumni still whispered about it. They talk about a tape so unsettling it made students question what was real on campus. The story begins with a student named Alex. Alex was a sophomore journalism major who loved digging into campus legends. When a rumor surfaced that a forgotten tape had recently been found in a locked storage room beneath the library, Alex couldn't resist investigating. After weeks of convincing the university archivist, Alex was granted permission to view the tape under supervision. The archivist warned, "You might want to be careful. Some say it's cursed." Alex inserted the grainy VHS tape into an ancient player. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar logo of the university. The first few minutes seemed normal. Smiling faculty welcoming the new students, shots of leafy quads, cheerful marching bands. Then the footage shifted, the image blurred, and a new voice appeared, not from any official introduction, but from an unknown man with a slow, almost hypnotic tone. He looked like a professor, but no one recognized him in the university records. His eyes seemed too wide, almost too intense, as he began to speak directly to the camera. "Welcome to the beginning," he said, "where every journey starts with a choice. But beware, not all paths lead forward. Some paths circle back into the shadows." Alex felt an uneasy chill. The man's voice wasn't threatening, but it carried an undeniable weight, like a warning from beyond the usual welcome speeches. The screen shifted again, showing grainy, flickering shots of campus locations, but something was off. Hallways looked longer, darker. Doors appeared slightly open, but no one entered or exited. Shadows seemed to move unnaturally in the corners of the frame. Then came the odd part. The tape showed faces of students, some familiar, some not, sitting in orientation groups, watching the very same tape. Except this time, their faces blurred, distorted, and their eyes glowed faintly in the low light. One student suddenly turned to the camera, whispering, "They're watching us." Then the tape cut to static for several seconds. Alex's heart pounded. The idea of students trapped in a loop, watching a tape that shows them watching itself. It was like a cruel time loop or a warning about something cyclical and inescapable. The footage resumed with a low hum, revealing a shadowy figure walking along campus at night. No face was visible, but the figure seemed to pause at several locations, places where students had mysteriously disappeared over the years. The man on the tape spoke again. "The watcher walks where the lost linger. To see is to be seen. To know is to become unknown." Alex rewound and watched again, but the shadowy figure seemed to grow clearer each time, as if the tape was evolving or trying to reveal itself. Suddenly, the screen flickered violently, and a student's face appeared for a split second, Alex's own face. It was impossible. The tape had been recorded decades ago. Panicked, Alex ejected the tape, but the image lingered in his mind. He asked the archivist if anyone else had seen the tape recently. The archivist looked uneasy. "You're not the first. And every time someone watches it, something changes. Objects move. People report strange sightings around campus. It's like the tape is alive, and it's connected to the students in some way." Alex began to notice odd things on campus. Hallway lights flickering in the shape of letters. Whispering voices when alone in the library. Fellow students disappearing for hours without explanation, only to return with no memory of where they'd been. One night, Alex returned to the basement archive to confront the tape again. The room was freezing cold. The tape was missing. In its place, a handwritten note read, "The beginning is never the start. The watcher is the watched. Find the path, or be lost forever." Alex's investigation turned into obsession. He learned that every student who watched the tape reported a sense of being followed by something unseen yet undeniable. It wasn't physical, but psychological, a creeping paranoia, like the campus itself was alive and watching. Some alumni claimed that the tape was a kind of test, a ritual that marked those who truly belonged and those who were destined to vanish. The tape itself became a legend, a haunting reminder that some traditions should never be unearthed and some warnings should never be ignored. Because on some campuses, the past isn't just history. It's a shadow lurking in the halls, waiting for new eyes to see it and new footsteps to follow it. It began like any ordinary assignment, a simple essay prompt handed out during an early October lecture at a small university known more for its arts program than for anything else. The professor, an eccentric man with a thin smile and glasses perched low on his nose, gave the class a topic that seemed harmless enough. Write about a defining moment in your life that shaped who you are today. Most students groaned, already tired of endless reflective essays. But one student, a quiet, unassuming junior named Lucas, took the assignment very seriously. Lucas was known for being a little different. Not exactly strange, but distant. He always sat at the back of the classroom, rarely spoke, and had a habit of writing intensely in his notebook, even when no one was watching. Lucas worked on the essay for days, obsessing over every detail. He wrote about a recent event, something that no one else knew about. It was a story about a close friend who had been in a serious accident just weeks before the assignment was given. The accident left that friend in the hospital, in critical condition. But as Lucas wrote, something unsettling began to take shape in his words. His essay described the event with chilling precision, recounting the hospital room, the steady beep of machines, the anxious faces of visitors. Yet in the middle of the essay, Lucas started including strange details, moments that hadn't happened yet. He described a sudden change in the friend's condition, a decline that would lead to a tragic end. He wrote about a specific night, a date that was still days away from when the essay was due. At first, his classmates didn't notice. His essay seemed just like a sad story, a reflection of fear and hope all tangled together. But when the professor read Lucas's paper, his reaction was unexpected. He frowned deeply, then quietly asked to speak with Lucas after class. The meeting was brief. The professor told Lucas that his writing had an odd weight to it, as if the words carried something more than just a story. Lucas just nodded, looking uneasy. He didn't explain where the details came from. 2 days after the essay was submitted, the friend mentioned in the story passed away exactly as Lucas had described, on the exact night and in the same way. The campus was shaken, but the story didn't end there. Rumors began circulating that Lucas's essay was a kind of prophecy. Some said he had psychic powers. Others whispered that he somehow caused the death by writing it into existence. The eerie part? Lucas didn't seem to react to any of it. He was quiet as ever, but a subtle change had come over him. His eyes looked distant, almost as if he were watching something no one else could see. Over the next few weeks, strange incidents began to happen around Lucas. Classmates reported hearing him whispering to himself in empty hallways. Some said they saw him staring at the wall, unmoving for long periods. A few swore that his shadow looked distorted, elongated and flickering, even in broad daylight. One night, a fellow student, curious and worried, decided to check on Lucas. She found him sitting at his desk, the same notebook open, writing feverishly. When she asked what he was doing, Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he showed her a new essay he was working on. This time, the story was about the upcoming week, events that hadn't happened yet, but were described in haunting detail. The student left feeling a chill run down her spine. Days later, elements from Lucas's new essay started to unfold. A minor fire in a dorm room, a strange power outage during a big exam, and then something more serious, an accident during a campus event. Each incident matched what Lucas had written, word for word. The university was forced to intervene. Professors and administrators urged Lucas to seek help, worried about his mental health. Psychologists evaluated him, but found no clear diagnosis. Lucas insisted that he was just writing what he saw in his mind, but he couldn't explain how or why. Then, the strangest thing happened. Lucas vanished. One morning, his dorm room was empty. His belongings were gone, and his notebooks were left open on his desk. On the last page of the most recent essay was a chilling sentence, scrawled in a hurried hand. "Tomorrow, someone will not come back." No one knew what that meant. The campus went on alert. The next day, a popular senior student, known for organizing campus events, disappeared during a late-night hike with friends. No trace was found for weeks. The search ended with only one clue: a crumpled piece of paper in a hidden pocket of the missing student's backpack. It was a fragment of Lucas's final essay. The mystery of Lucas, the prophetic essays, and the missing student became the stuff of campus legend. Some say Lucas predicted his own disappearance in those essays, and some whisper that he still roams the university grounds, writing down events before they happen. To this day, the university's archives hold Lucas's essays, locked away and rarely seen. But every year, during the anniversary of the friend's death, students report hearing the scratch of a pen on paper coming from the empty classroom where Lucas last sat. And the question remains, Was it mere coincidence or something darker? Something that turned words into reality? In every school, college, or a university, study groups are a lifeline. A place where stressed students gather to swap notes, quiz each other, and push through the inevitable pressure of exams. But what happens when a study group itself becomes the subject of an unsolved mystery? This is the story of a group of students who seemingly vanished in a thin air, right in the middle of preparing for their final exams. It all started at a university known for its strict academic culture and sprawling old campus buildings. Among the many student groups was one particularly dedicated team of 5, all ambitious, all driven, and all deeply intertwined with the pressures of their upcoming finals. The group met every evening in the same classroom, a small, nondescript room on the 3rd floor of the humanities building. The room was ordinary, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, desks arranged in a semicircle, and walls decorated with faded posters from past lectures. Nothing about the room suggested the ominous fate that would soon unfold within it. For weeks, the study group followed their usual routine, gathering at 7 p.m. sharp, poring over textbooks, debating essay topics, and quizzing each other on dates and theories. Their sessions often ran late into the night, sometimes past midnight. Despite the strain, the group was tight-knit, often sharing laughs and light moments between the stress. Then, one night, something changed. On a rainy Thursday evening, the group arrived at their usual spot. But one of the students, Lena, noticed a strange chill in the air as she opened the classroom door. The usual hum of the fluorescent lights was replaced by a low, almost imperceptible humming noise that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Her friends brushed it off as the building's old wiring acting up. They settled into their seats and began reviewing notes. But as the clock ticked past 8 p.m., the atmosphere grew heavier. It was as if the air itself was thickening, pressing down on their skin and thoughts. That's when the strange occurrences began. First, the notes on their desk started to blur, as though the ink was dissolving before their eyes. When one student tried to read aloud from his textbook, the words twisted on the page, turning into gibberish no matter how he focused. Lena was the first to speak up. "Did you guys see that? The words, they're changing." Her voice was barely a whisper. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances. One joked nervously, "Maybe we're just too stressed." But the tension was undeniable. Suddenly, the classroom lights flickered violently, plunging the room into brief darkness. When the lights snapped back on, one of the group members, Aaron, was gone. "Where did Aaron go?" someone called out. But there was no answer. They searched the classroom. The doors and windows were locked from the inside. No way out. No sign that Aaron had left at all. Panic began to set in. They tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. They shouted his name through the hallways, but the old building swallowed their voices without reply. Minutes dragged on. Then, one by one, the rest of the students started disappearing, each in strange, inexplicable ways. Emma was studying her notes when her pen slipped off the desk. Then she vanished before it hit the floor. Jason was writing an answer on the whiteboard when his body flickered, as if caught between two realities, and then he too was gone. Only Lena remained, heart pounding, trapped in a room that felt like a trap. She screamed for help, but the sound barely echoed. Then the lights went out completely. When the janitor arrived early the next morning, the classroom was empty. No students, no belongings, just a faint scent of cold metal lingering in the air. The university launched a search, but no trace of the 5 students was ever found. Their disappearance baffled everyone. No signs of forced entry, no surveillance footage showing them leaving, and no calls or messages afterward. The classroom was sealed off indefinitely. But here's where the story gets stranger. Months later, during renovations, a hidden compartment was discovered inside the classroom walls. Inside it were notebooks, worn, torn, and filled with strange symbols mixed between the students' notes. The handwriting was theirs, but the symbols seemed to shift on the pages as they were observed, almost as if alive. Experts who examined the notebooks said the symbols resembled an ancient form of script rumored to be linked with summoning rituals, rituals that blurred the lines between dimensions. Was the study group unwittingly drawn into something far beyond academic stress? Something that used the intense mental focus and pressure of exam season as a gateway? Some speculate that the old building itself holds a secret, an interdimensional threshold triggered by collective concentration. Lena was never found. Some say she managed to escape, forever haunted by what she witnessed that night. Others whisper that the students still exist somewhere between worlds, trapped in a limbo created by their shared mental energy, a ghost study group eternally preparing for exams that will never come. What happened in that classroom is a chilling reminder. Sometimes the greatest horrors don't come from monsters or violence, but from the fragile boundaries of reality, and what can happen when those boundaries are pushed too far. It all started during the first week of the fall semester, when Jake transferred to a new university known for its sprawling campus and long history. Eager to make friends, he was quickly invited to join a fraternity, a tight-knit group that promised brotherhood, late-night parties, and a place to belong. The house itself was an old Victorian-style mansion, tucked away at the edge of campus, with tall windows and creaking wooden floors that seemed to whisper secrets. Jake didn't know much about the fraternity, only that their reputation was mixed. Some said it was a place where students bonded over late-night study sessions, and others claimed strange things happened behind those old walls. But he was young and skeptical. The idea of belonging anywhere after transferring seemed worth any risk. At first, everything seemed normal. Jake met the other members, guys who shared jokes, played video games, and talked about classes. But there was one night he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a Friday, a few days after Jake moved in. The house was buzzing with energy, music thumping faintly from the basement. Jake was upstairs when he heard a soft chanting coming from below, a low, rhythmic murmur that didn't match the usual party noise. Curious, he slipped quietly down the stairs and peeked through the doorway to the basement. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles arranged in a strange pattern on the floor, circles inside triangles, and symbols Jake didn't recognize. Around the pattern, several fraternity brothers sat cross-legged, their faces serious, almost trance-like. At the center was a worn leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and edges curled. Jake froze, heart pounding, but no one noticed him. The chanting grew louder, the voices weaving together in a hypnotic cadence that made the hairs on his neck stand up. He wanted to leave, but something kept him rooted in place. Suddenly, one of the brothers, Mark, the fraternity president, spoke in a voice that was barely audible over the chant. "We call to the past, to those who built this house, to those who watch and protect." The words sent a chill through Jake's spine. For days afterward, Jake tried to dismiss the basement ritual as some weird tradition, something staged to bond the group or scare new members into loyalty. But strange things began happening. At night, he would hear footsteps pacing the hallways when no one else was awake. The old grandfather clock in the foyer sometimes chimed at odd hours, even when unplugged. And sometimes, when he looked at the walls, shadows seemed to stretch and move just beyond the edge of his vision. One evening, Jake found a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the main lounge. The door was small, just big enough for a person to crawl through. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, He squeezed inside and discovered a narrow tunnel leading deep under the house. The air was damp and cold. The walls were lined with old photographs, black and white images of past fraternity members, some smiling, others staring blankly into the camera. Most chilling of all were the handwritten notes scratched onto the tunnel walls. Cryptic phrases like "the watchers are patient, and they return with the moon." Jake shivered and hurried back upstairs, but he couldn't shake the feeling he had uncovered something far darker than a college prank. That night, he dreamt of the ritual again, but this time he was part of it. He stood in the center of the camelot pattern, the leather book open before him. Mark's voice echoed, but distorted, speaking words Jake couldn't understand. A shadow figure appeared, faceless and silent, its presence pressing down on him like a heavy fog. Jake woke up gasping, sweat cold on his skin. The room was dark, but he could still feel the presence lingering. The next day, he tried to confront Mark, but the fraternity president brushed off his concerns with a casual laugh. "It's just tradition, man. Nothing to worry about." But Jake wasn't convinced. In the following weeks, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. New members whispered about strange sensations, feelings of being watched even in broad daylight. Some said they heard faint music or singing when the house was empty. Others reported waking up with bruises or scratches they couldn't explain. One night, Jake stayed up late in his room, determined to find answers. At exactly midnight, he heard the chanting start again, this time louder, more urgent. He followed the sound to the basement, but when he arrived, the ritual had already begun without him. The fraternity brothers formed the pattern, their voices rising and falling in an eerie harmony. Mark stood at the center, holding the leather book, his eyes glazed and unblinking. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flames. In the darkness, Jake thought he saw a shadow detach itself from the walls, a shape, human-like but distorted, moving with unnatural speed. He wanted to run, but his feet felt glued to the spot. The shadow reached toward Mark, who collapsed, eyes wide with terror. The chanting stopped. Silence pressed down, thick and suffocating. When the lights flickered back on, Mark was gone. Panic spread through the house the next day. Some thought he had run away. Others whispered he was taken by whatever the ritual had summoned. The fraternity disbanded shortly after. The mansion left empty, its secrets sealed away behind locked doors and broken windows. Jake left the university that semester, unable to face what he'd witnessed. But sometimes, years later, he would pass by the old house and hear faint chanting carried by the wind. And he would wonder, what did the fraternity really call forth that night? And who, or what, is still waiting in the shadows of that strange ritual? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But some pictures, they hold secrets far darker than anything you could imagine. This story begins with a student named Claire, who was about to graduate from a well-known university. Like most students, she was excited, nervous, and ready to close one chapter of her life and begin another. What she didn't expect was that her graduation photo, the one she thought would be a proud keepsake, would haunt her for years to come. It started innocently enough. After the ceremony, the university photographer handed out the official graduation photos, group shots, individual portraits, all perfectly arranged. Claire was thrilled. The photo showed her smiling with her friends, the iconic university building looming behind them, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the campus lawn. But something was wrong. When Claire looked closely at the group photo, she noticed something strange. Behind her and her classmates, standing just off to the side, was an extra face, faint, blurry, and almost transparent, but unmistakably human. The face didn't belong to any student she recognized. It wasn't a teacher or staff member either, and no one else in the photo seemed to notice it or mention it. Claire showed the photo to her friends, but they all said she was imagining things. "It's probably just a camera glitch," one said. "A double exposure or some kind of shadow," another guessed. But Claire knew better. The more she stared at that strange face, the more unsettled she became. It wasn't just the appearance, it was the expression. The face was watching her. There was a cold, hollow look in the eyes, a slight, almost mocking smile that sent a chill down her spine. Determined to find out what was going on, Claire took the photo to the university's archives the next day. She wanted to see if anyone else had reported anything unusual during the ceremony, or if there were older graduation photos with similar oddities. What she found surprised her. The archivist pulled out a dusty binder filled with old graduation albums. Leafing through the pages, Claire's heart started pounding. On several photos dating back decades, there were faint faces in the background, always blurry, always off to the side, faces that weren't part of the graduating classes. One photo from the 1970s showed a figure standing alone near the edge of the group, almost transparent, like a ghost. Another from the 1980s had a shadowy face peeking from behind a tree, eyes fixed directly on the camera. These weren't random photographic errors. They looked deliberate, like something or someone was being captured on film, but refused to appear fully. Claire asked the archivist about these faces. The archivist hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's a legend around here," he said, "about the Watcher. They say it's the spirit of a student who died on campus years ago, someone who never got to graduate. Some believe the Watcher appears in graduation photos, always trying to join the ceremony, forever trapped between worlds." Claire felt the air grow colder as she listened. Could this really be happening? Was the extra face in her photo the Watcher? That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept looking at the photo on her phone, the strange face staring back at her through the screen. It was as if it was trying to communicate. Days passed, and strange things started happening. Her phone would light up with notifications, messages she didn't send, pictures she didn't take. One was a blurry image of the campus at night, with a faint figure standing under a street lamp. Another was a short video clip showing the graduation lawn, but this time the extra face was clearer, stepping forward slowly toward the camera. Claire's friends began noticing her change. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, as if the photo had cast a shadow over her life. At night, she thought she heard whispering voices outside her window, faint and unintelligible, but always cold and distant. One evening, she decided to visit the campus after hours. She wanted to confront whatever was behind the strange face, to understand why it was haunting her. Walking the familiar paths, now bathed in moonlight and shadows, Claire felt a presence. Somewhere in the distance, she saw a flicker, an indistinct figure watching her from the edge of the trees. Her heart hammered as she approached the spot. Suddenly, the air grew thick and heavy, as if time itself slowed down. Claire heard a soft voice, barely a whisper, calling her name. She spun around, but no one was there. Then, the face appeared again, this time, not in a photo, but in the darkness before her. The same cold, hollow eyes, the faint smile. The Watcher. In that moment, Claire realized the truth. The Watcher wasn't trying to harm her. It wasn't a malevolent ghost, but a lost soul, desperate to be remembered, desperate to be seen. Her graduation photo was its only way of reaching out, a silent plea across decades. Claire took a deep breath and whispered, "I see you." The face softened, the eyes losing some of their emptiness. From that night on, the strange occurrences stopped. The messages ceased, the whispering voices faded. But Claire kept the photo, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of a presence that lingered just beyond the veil, watching, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. And every year, when graduation day comes around, she wonders how many other photos hold the watcher's gaze, hidden just out of sight, waiting for the next lost student to notice.